Hey, in this podcast, my name is Bo Larimer. I've been hosting a podcast for my college class at CSUB. And so in this podcast, I'm going to continue my discussion with my guest, Eric Olinger. We're both also Kern High School District teachers. He is a teacher at the Kern High School District on special assignment, or called a TOSA. And so he kind of moves around the district as sort of an instructional coach trainer role. And I am just a regular freshman English teacher at Independence High School, along with teaching my college class in the evenings. So one thing we're going to get into in our discussion in this second part of a two-part podcast I had with him. In the second part, we are going to get into restorative practices. So restorative classroom management type practices are very kind of social and emotionally aware practices built off of a restorative justice model that seeks to address student misbehavior within the classroom setting and the instructional setting in a way that restores relationship, helps students in kind of a social and emotional learning way learn from mistakes in behavior and mistakes in the decisions they make, and possibly hopefully redirect their course, while also restoring the relationship with their instructors and their classmates and the people at the school site. So we're going to be exploring effective statements, restorative questioning, small behavior, impromptu talks with kids in a way that is productive and helpful and doesn't cause more problems, but instead solves problems. If you want to check out part one of the podcast, it's really great. It's all the proactive measures a teacher should take in building relational capacity, building relationships with students, building a safe learning community, and really making decisions, classroom management decisions, from the perspective of becoming the students' allies and not establishing an oppositional dynamic. The way we talked about is we really explore the idea of cultivating a warm demander mindset in managing your classroom and building relationships. So that's part one, is that. And part two, we're going to go into some of the best restorative practices a classroom teacher can use. All right, I hope you enjoy the video. Bye. To recap, the first part, we talked about kind of having the right mindset and philosophy in regards to social emotional learning and classroom management really being an opportunity for social emotional instruction and helping students learn how to be better people, and keeping that whole child in mind, being a warm demander, assuming the best. And you shared some great stories and some stuff out of your experience. We talked about proactively going and building relational capacity, right? Strategically seeking kids out and building that relationship by talking to them, being real to them, connecting with them intentionally. And then also, the last section we talked about, you had just finished discussing the importance of building community, starting the year in an effort to build community, having a community building circle. I like doing kind of rotating circles where kids are rotating around in an inner circle, outer circle, taking turns talking to each other, just getting to know each other and trust each other, along with kind of sharing out. And so those are all preventative. Like you mentioned, 80%, right? That's all preventative. It's preventative and proactive. Building and maintaining relationships prevent those problems from happening, right? You even mentioned you don't even like the term restorative practices because it sounds so reactive, when so much of this is proactive and building community, building relationship. And so those are important tiers, right? Having consistent routines. You mentioned meeting the kids out the door, right? That has such a big impact. I talked about the 2x10 strategy, seeking out kids and having a duration of small, short, personal conversations with the kid. And then building community, having moments where they get to talk to each other and develop that safe learning environment. And then having curriculum where you're teaching them about being mindful, teaching them about not getting caught up in their emotions, teaching them about being more aware of where they are at in terms to others. So the last thing I want to talk about, though, is when we have that kid, like you in your story, the kid that just snaps or the kid that won't engage and is defiant, how can we have a productive conversation and be strategic in repairing relationship that's falling apart, right? Even if we're doing the best we can at times, right? Kids have tough days, kids make mistakes, and being productive and strategic in learning from those behavior mistakes. So that's where I'm going to pass this off to you. I am going to, oh, there it is. Scroll down to, scroll up. I got to get the hang of this. Where am I at? There we go.
Yeah.
All right. So restorative questions. You want to talk about effective statements first, though?
Let's go. Can we go to the continuum and then we can maybe go back? That would
Absolutely. There we go.
So go to the, you can use that one if you'd like, if they're used to seeing that, or the one before.
Oh, yeah, I got you. There it is.
Oh, there you go. So I think this is a great slide because, again, yes, 80% is proactive, but you're going to have that 20%. In high school setting, we call those tier 2 or tier 3 kids. Even with all of this in place, even within your classroom, when community is built and you're doing everything that you need to do to be successful, there is still going to be a small portion of your kids that are still going to struggle for one reason or another. Sometimes those struggles can be between student-teacher. Sometimes those breakdowns are between student and student. Either way, learning ceases, and it's very difficult to go unless we do some kind of restoration or some kind of repair. And as you look at this slide here, when we go from informal, it moves to the right to the more formal process. Each one of these is more in depth and takes more time, more planning, more people, more structure. So at the beginning, you just want to start off with the most, after the community building, the most, when we are restoring those affective statements. And so affective statements and affective questions are, if you do bring the student out or any kind of conversation that you're having, it's a little bit of a format that you can follow. If you want to go ahead and show that slide.
Yeah, and absolutely. Could you correct me on this? But I believe, so when you have behavior pop up like that, the affective statements is being careful and intentional about how you talk to the student about what you're observing them doing, right?
Yes,
and kind of guiding them towards better behavior, helping them notice the behavior they're doing. And then the questions is when you move into kind of asking them and pushing them to think about what they're doing and how they can go from making these mistakes in behavior to noticing that problematic behavior and then moving towards learning from that and not making those same mistakes.
Yes.
So
absolutely.
Okay, perfect. And
so an affective statement would be something like you want to attach a feeling with what's going on. So this is nothing very formal. This is very simple. It's just simply having a quick conversation with a kid. It's very awkward a little bit when you follow the steps. The portions of the steps are important to have, but the order isn't necessarily that important to go through. But what you do is you say, when I hear or when I saw you do whatever it was, I felt a feeling, some kind of feeling you feel. You tell them what your needs would want to be, like what you're expecting from them. And then also the request that you're asking, would you be willing to do this? So for an example, when I saw you call Janie a whatever name, it made me worried because I'm afraid your relationships are going to be broken down and you're not going to do very well. I need you to value, being respectful in this class with one another. We've talked about that. Would you be willing next time you talk to her to use more respectful language? And so you're telling them exactly what you saw, how it made you feel, why that's important, and then also following up with a request like, would you be willing to try this in the future? So those are very simple ways. They're a little bit awkward at first, but you can get really good at it. And you can use your own language. They don't necessarily always have to be negative. If you see kids do things that are doing great, use an affective statement. Hey, man, when I saw you help that kid on his paper, man, I felt awesome because I know you're going to kill it. You're doing exactly what people need to do with one another. Would you be willing to keep that up or would try it with other kids in the class? So it can go both positive and negative, but it's a very quick, easy way for you to recognize what's going on, attach a feeling to it, letting students understand what they're saying and what they're doing affects other people. Bridging that gap for empathy and for what I'm saying does matter to other people. And then just to follow through with that. So that would be an affective statement.
Yeah, and just to add a little bit to that, Eric, absolutely. I feel like this format is very helpful in being strategic, because it's easy to sit here and say, yeah, I'm going to be objective. But man, when the kid is ticking you off, and it's just natural, like kids are going to get under your skin. It's a lot, right? It's just like, it's like a marriage thing, right? Where it's so like in the position of, yeah, I'm going to do I'm going to treat my wife in this way. But then, man, when you're in the heat of the moment, it's harder to make those decisions. And the same thing applies for teaching, right? Where you want to go, okay, I'm going to very specifically observe in kind of this curious way, right? Curious, not furious, right? You want to detach and go, okay, here's what I'm seeing, here's what I'm hearing, observe the behavior, notice the behavior, and then I often use I'm concerned, and use a voice of concern as kind of the emotion to link to, because here's what we need to see and recognize how it might affect your relationship with the teacher, relationship with classmates, but then also how it affects them, right? So they can see that noticing this behavior linking to this consequence is so important, and then you have kind of the foundation to move forward.
And you don't need to do these affective statements right then and there. That might be the best time. If feelings are kind of high or hot, that's not the time to have that conversation. There's always going to be a consequence. It does not have to be immediate. So you can allow things to settle down. You can go to that later. Just give yourself time to make sure that everybody's, toward you, that you've got it under control so that you can be more valuable. That statement can happen after class. It can be happening on the next day, whatever best it is. And again, if it's positive, public, because you want everybody else, it doesn't matter if they're 15, 16, and 200 pounds. It's just like if it's a 5-year-old, like, oh, look how great Janie's doing. Everybody looks at Janie and they want to follow in line. So if it's something that's you want to publicly announce that so that others can learn to do that. But if it's a correction, make that private, and you'll be better served with that.
Man, I wish I could send this podcast to year one teacher Larimer for him to watch. Because I've discovered that the hard way, but man, is so helpful to leverage praise with the publicity of it, and then leverage correct behavior correction in a private environment, right? Because man, you get all the benefits of praising a kid from doing that publicly, right? And recognizing it, and it's very affirming. But then if you did the same thing with correction publicly, you would be wrestling with shame. And man, when people feel shame or feel like the light's on them, it just escalates like crazy. So important to say, hey, visit me at lunch, right? Or step outside the door, or everyone's working, come over to the corner of the room with me. Let's talk quietly for a second and have some form of privacy for that type of conversation. Absolutely. And using those affective statements in framing praise in a way that helps them see, this is the behavior, here's how it impacts me, here's how it impacts my community in a very positive way, but then correcting privately, saying, hey, here's the behavior, here's how it's affecting the community, here's how it's affecting you personally, and being very objective and strategic with your language when you talk about that. So the kid steps outside. Can you talk through kind of why it's so important to go through this process right here?
Yeah, and so this is the next step. So this is a little bit more in depth. So if you were going to start to do some restorative questioning, especially if harm has been done. Now the harm might be toward you, or it might be toward another student. If there is, they hate to say victim, but if there is somebody who has been harmed in this situation, the red questions are questions that you would intentionally ask the person who created the harm. And the blue questions would be questions you would ask somebody who was harmed. And if you look at that, our questions are, okay, what happened? What were you thinking at the time? Who was affected by what you did? Again, starting to get them to see the connection that their actions do affect other people. how were they affected, and then what needs to happen to make things right. One question you're going to notice that's not on there is, why did you do that? We know that the why questions typically do not, they'll say, I don't know, or there's not much accountability. There is a ton of accountability in these questions. So by going through that with them, they have to admit to what they had done. They talk about their thought process. Why were they doing it? Then you start to get into being affected. Who was affected? You can help them through that. If they go, I don't know, or just one person, you can start to go, well, I'm out here now with you. Your parents are going to hear about this later. They're, the range of people who get affected by their behavior is quite large. So really trying to get them to see that. And then exactly how it was, what their action did, how they were in control of that, but then also for them to start to come up with things on what needs to be done that's right.
Yeah. Hey, Eric, real quick, just to add to that second question of the harm, sometimes I think you might not have success with using thinking as the word, because sometimes, right, they see red and they're not thinking. They are making decisions from a purely emotional position. So I've sometimes used the question, if I don't say what were you thinking, I'll use this, what were you feeling, or what was going on in your head, or what emotions were you dealing with when that happened in the moment.
And again, these are conversations that aren't happening right after the event. If they are hot, if they're still upset, it's not going to be beneficial. This is a cool down time. This could be much later in the day. This could be the next day. Again, you can hold them accountable and there can be consequences. It doesn't have to be instant. The consequences and the accountability are still there. And most of the time, especially if it's something that's heated, it's much better served at a later time, even if it's done with you. So the blue ones are if there are with somebody that's going to be harmed. It's incredibly important if somebody was harmed, if they want to have this conversation with the person who created the harm. So again, that's why it takes more time, more preparation. I need to go talk with the person who had been harmed and say, are you cool with having a conversation with this guy? Is it all right if we let them know? We let the students know exactly what we're going to ask. These questions are not any secret. We'll tell them, this is what we're going to ask you, and this is what we're going to ask him. Let them prepare and understand there's no surprises at what's coming at them. And then if the person that was harmed agrees to that, then you can go with that victim. We do not want the person who's harmed to be reharmed. Because if I don't get their permission, or if everybody's mind is not in the right set to make this right, all we're going to do is re-victimize the person, and that's only going to compound the problem. So sometimes this will work, sometimes this will not, depending on the student and what went on. But for the most part, we've seen these, we're now having restorative centers in schools where students are running these and asking these questions, and I've seen unbelievable results, how the kids are willing to go through this process, and man, it makes things much better between them. But some form of restoration, even if it's with you.
Hey, real quick, Eric. So often when I'm dealing with a conflict, I mean, either it's usually one directional when it's, hey, I'm teaching them and they're lashing out at me, right? So oftentimes I'm the victim and they're the person who's destroying the relationship in that instance. And so that's when it's most one directional. And so I keep that in mind. But when it's between students, oftentimes it's a real blurry thing. There's not a clean line between victim and antagonist, or victim and aggressor. Oftentimes, right, there was someone who kind of initiates, and then there's someone who retaliates. But the line between the two, it's kind of back and forth. So both have been harmed, both have done harm. How do you kind of negotiate the blurriness of that situation?
And that's the time portion of it, because you do have to have some conversations. You need to go to each student and say, okay, what's going on? What's your side of this? And through that, you can kind of find out, was there somebody who created harm, who had been harmed? And like you said, sometimes they both had been harmed and had created harm. So it just depends on each situation. And so you just follow the script, you follow the questioning. You might ask both students the red questions and both students the blue questions. And basically it's just being able for them to be heard, being able for them to be, understand that harm has come to them and shame has come to them, but we want to get through this, and what do we do to make things right? And then we got to follow through with that. Okay, we're going to make sure that those things happen, whatever they come up with. But what that does is, in the old days, like we were talking about before, we would just say, go to the office, sit down, shut up. And then you have this incredible animosity between these students, probably for the rest of the year, which is really going to compound, one, their interactions with one another, but also how much learning is going on. Now this is a very unsafe, not fun classroom to be in. And so my ability to pay attention to the lesson and the teacher and what's going on is really going to be inhibited because of what's going on. And even more so with teacher and student. I always laugh. I'm like, if I get in a really bad fight with my wife and we don't have a conversation, I can't just go up to her and go, hey, hon, you want to go to dinner tonight? She's like, I ain't going anywhere.
Yeah.
There's got to be a conversation. We got to have the talk, and they're uncomfortable and we don't like it, but how effective they are and how much better we feel once we have done that and we have repaired that relationship. And now we can move forward with everything good. We're all back on the same page. And so everything has been righted. So it's the same with students.
Yeah. Hey, I just have one or two questions as we kind of head towards the end here. Yeah. Just to echo what you're saying, man, emotional distance. Yes. In the marriage analogy, having the conversation, if there's not emotional distance from the event, is also often leading to more conversations later on down the road. So emotional distance as much as possible. What I found is there's not always the ideal amount of emotional distance. And that's just because of how chaotic it is keeping track of the teaching life. So the one thing I want to mention is when there's not as much emotional distance as would be best, definitely don't talk to both kids in the same conversation. That's what I found is talk to them, right? If there's not enough emotional distance, talk to this kid and say, hey, what's your side of the story? Because when they're in the same conversation, it's an escalation for sure, 9 times out of 10. So saying to the kid, hey, you're the mediator, right? You're calming them down, saying, hey, I'm talking to you from a position of alliance. Let's kind of recognize what's happening, wrestle through what's going on, and then see where we need to go. So talking to the parties separately as much as possible, if there's not emotional distance if possible. And then really helping them recognize, hey, here's the conversation before the consequence, right? Because immediately I've noticed kids are just used to the system. They're like, I'm getting like the story you mentioned, the kids like, just send me to the dean, right? I'm ready for the consequence. And that's learned helplessness, right? They'd rather escape through the consequence than have to deal with and resolve the issue personally and learn from it, which is sometimes more uncomfortable than storming off and sitting with your arms crossed in the dean's office. So conversation before consequence. And
again, give yourself permission. Give yourself permission for time, right? This can happen the following week. This could happen 2 or 3 weeks later. I've had them go where it's been 2 weeks and they still haven't had that conversation. They're just not ready yet. And then some 2.5 weeks later, now we can get together. So just if they're good friends before, maybe it can go a little bit quicker. If it's not, that might take some time.
Yeah, and that just goes to your point about being strategic. Just like you're strategic and you're documenting and you're intentional with building community, with building relationships with the 2x10, right? Seeking out those good rapport building conversations. In the restorative conversation, you're strategic too, right? You're making a decision, I want emotional distance, or I'm separating the parties, or we're kind of working things out later on. Absolutely, I found that to be true. Kind of one other thing that has been so important kind of in helping me figure this out is, like you said, consequences still have to happen, right? You want to be warm and establish a position of alliance, but you are the warm demander, right? So there are expectations, and when those expectations are not met and lines are crossed, the behavior does have consequences. Restorative justice is still justice, right? It's not just restorative. There's still the intervention. There's still the justice. So there is consequences. It just has to happen in the right framework. Can you talk a little bit about how important it is to have kind of a hierarchy of intervention? And what I mean by that is you don't go with the little thing, hey, that's it, Ding's office, right? And jump to these real extreme consequences. You document and kind of build up the progression so they can see there's a pattern of behavior. But then other times saying, hey, we've had this conversation before, we've talked about this behavior before, it's documented, we had this consequence, we're moving on to that consequence. Could you talk a little bit about the importance of that justice element in the restorative justice model of behavior intervention?
Yeah, so absolutely. So again, if the affective statements aren't working, you go to the questions. If the questions aren't working, you might have to, again, bump up to have some form of more formal circle or something like that to hold that kid accountable. In current high school district, we do have ways to get those kids. If you're starting to see a student with the same behavior over and over and over, and you have all of these systems in place, that's more of things that kid is struggling with. So that might be where, yes, we do still go through these things because I still have you in my class, but I might get you additional support through a social worker or with an interventionist that we have on campus, where they'll pull them out into small groups and start to really build some of these skills. It's probably just skill based if you're seeing the same thing repeat. So if it's a one-time problem, these can be very, very effective. But if you do start to see that repeating, just know that you do have support, and that kid needs additional support from just what you're providing. And so you want to be really transparent with that student. You want to let them know that I care about you. You're struggling with this. I got somebody that I trust that can help you out a little bit too. Getting them that additional support that they need in whatever areas that they have. But definitely having those consequences there for them, having those conversations with them. But again, always building that 5-to-1 positive to negative. You know, those times that you're kicking in, you can easily say, man, I'm sorry, that didn't go well yesterday. I did not like how things went with us. And you know, say you're sorry to a kid, and you don't have to be sorry for him cursing at you, but you can be sorry about things got to a point where it was, and that's not why I do this, and I just want to help you out. How are you doing? So it's just a big kind of circle of life thing. I'm not sure if I answered your question.
Yeah. Oh, no, perfect. In fact, you touched on one important point, which is the point that I want to end on. So this is kind of our last topic. Is I remember young year one teacher Larimer, as I dealt with some of these problems in class, I remember thinking, I got to handle my own classroom, right? There's no way I'm going to reach out to anyone else. I got to take care of my business. I got to be able to do this on my own. And year 7 Larimer would, if I could go back and watch his podcast, would say that is absolutely the wrong way to think about it, right? The best way to deal with these kinds of issues specifically is with support, right? And that's support for the teacher too, because if you only do this on your own, that's just not going to be enough for some of these kids, right? They need that extra support. They need a social worker coming in and helping them. They need an expert behavior guy coming in like you and doing a circle with the whole class. They need so many of those things. I remember last year I had a literacy class, and I had a student, and I was outside the door talking to this kid every morning. It seemed like in one of those restorative conversations, and the class was so aggressive and antagonistic to each other. It was an unsafe learning environment. And I remember thinking, you know what? I recognize I need help. These kids need more behavior support than I can give them, and then my expertise involves. And so going to counselors for specific kids, and then going to one of our behavior interventionists, Ben, up at the office, and saying, hey, Ben, help me out. Come do some stuff with me, work with me. And having that support was so important. And I think year 1 teachers feel unsure about reaching out in the sense that it might make them look incompetent. And I would say it's the opposite, right? Competency is working as part of the team, collaborating with the team, especially with behavior. Could you kind of talk about the importance of that, but then mention a year 1 teacher, what people can you go to the average campus? What kinds of people can you seek out for certain problems?
Absolutely. So for sure, you have your team members that you're going to be working with, other teachers. So a lot of these teachers know these kids, or maybe you can look at the student schedule, find out what other classes he has, because now you have teachers with that same kid. You can reach out to them going, this is what I'm seeing. Are you seeing it too? What are you doing? Have you found anything that works with this kid? Call the parents, call the parents, call the parents. They're on your side, making sure you're making contact with them. A lot of time, trust me, if somebody called me about my kid acting up, I would make sure my kid doesn't act up. Not every parent's going to be that way, but a lot of them will. You don't want anything to be a surprise. So earlier than later, you don't want all of a sudden the things to be out of control. You want that parent to be on your side. So if you've contacted them early and often, they know you're here at the best interest for their kid, and this is what I've been doing to help him. So then they're up to bat with you.
Yeah.
When it really
And talking
later.
talking to that parent from that position of alliance that we talked about, using some of those same things of, hey, here's what I'm noticing, here's kind of what I'm feeling, here's what we need to work together on with the kid. Here's and making sure you notice good qualities, right? Saying, hey, the kid is great in this way and great in this way, but here's where we need to kind of come together and work together as a team, and being their ally instead of saying, hey, having kind of a position of conflict, saying, hey, we're on the same team, here's some great elements, praise the kid, and say, here's where we can work together.
Absolutely. And so creating that classroom, doing everything we talked about, doing those proactive things, doing the 5-to-1 positive to negative, taking those to, 2 minutes 10 times a day. When all of that has been done, that student should be successful. That doesn't mean you're a bad teacher. That means he's lacking skill, or there's something going on that's blocking that for him. It has absolutely nothing to do with you. You reach out to those teachers, like we said, find out what's working with them. Try some of that. You call the parent. What do you do about this at home? You get that information. After you've tried those things and you've worked and there's still struggles, that's when you start to reach out. You know what? I need to get this kid to an interventionist. I need to get this kid maybe to talk to a social worker, maybe talk to the counselor. And a lot of times what they're going to say is, okay, what have you tried so far? And you can say, look, I've reached out to parents. We've got a very positive classroom. I've done everything that I can to reach relational capacity of this with the student. He just needs extra help. So it's building a case for you to get that kid the help that he needs. And again, it has nothing to do with you. Unless you haven't done some of those things, if you haven't created that, if you're correcting way more than you're praising, if all he ever does is get in trouble, he can never do anything right, it's going to fall a little bit on that.
And it's hard to avoid that oppositional dynamic if that's the only thing that's happening, right? You really have to seek out and create some kind of an alliance with the kid, and that doesn't happen without that relational capacity of, hey, communicating to them that you care about them beyond just correcting them when they step out of line.
But it's absolute a team approach. Things have shifted so much in all of education, no matter what grade level you go in. We know that now. We know how important all of this is, but there's also tons of support for all students at all levels. And so make sure you take advantage of that support. If you can correct that on your own through your relationship, fantastic. And again, it takes time. I had my first year of teaching, they gave me first year of high school teaching. They took all of the toughest kids they could. They stuck them all in one class. That way they didn't disrupt a lot of classes, only one. And they gave them to me, the new teacher, because everybody else was done with them. They were tough. The very first day, these kids walked in with 2 fingers flipped off in the air, telling everybody to F off. And they're like, you're going to send us out. And I'm like, no, have a seat. And it took time. I mean, I took this stuff and I started to check in with them. I had conversations with them, and it wasn't day 2. But over time and being able to check in and just being consistent with it, all of a sudden they understood that I wasn't going anywhere, that it was real. I really did care about them. And then things really radically started to change. And this class that became like one of my craziest, worst class became my absolute favorite class. Once they know you have their back, they will have your back for everything and anything. And these kids that used to come in, birds flipping off, going crazy, are now like asking if they could sweep my floor because they had spilt some chips on the floor or something like that. I mean, it was unbelievable, the transformation that I had. The only problem is it didn't transfer to the other classes. I built the relationship. I put the work in. I was reaping the benefits. I didn't have any problem. They never left. They were there early. They weren't tardy anymore. They got all their assignment. My life was easy. I just got out of the way. But they still got in trouble in the other things because you have to maintain that. You have to create that on your own. I can't create that relationship for you. A dean can't create that relationship for you. That parent can't, you know. And again, sometimes you have to look when they do 25 things wrong, you don't focus on that. You look for the one thing right and praise that. And it's tough. But if you're consistent, it is a powerful tool that can switch definitely in your favor.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. You hit on so many great points. And I think it really just comes back to that, right? Learning is relational. And you have to be strategic and intentional to build positive relationships, to show kids you care, to help build community. You have to help them build relationships with each other and kind of establish that, hey, we want this to be a warm but also demanding environment, in the sense that there's a warm, safe learning community, but there are high expectations for what we're going to work on and how you need to behave to keep that community solid. And so just having that mindset of curious, not furious, right? Seeing the kid behind the behavior and saying, hey, we're going to build up those positive relationships, build up that positive community, and then bringing them back into that positive relationship and positive community when they fall out. And then also, I think that curious, not furious is looking at behavior issues as opportunities to instruct the whole child, right? Help them learn to be more self-aware, help them learn how to manage their emotions and be productive and self-regulate and all those great things.
That's the diamond in the rough too. I mean, some of these kids don't need that much support, but others, especially if you get into high school teaching, you're going to be possibly the last teacher that these kids are going to have, the last intervention to get these kids straight. And when you can make that switch for them, that's life-changing for these students. And so it's incredibly rewarding. It's a lot of work. It takes a lot of time, but the benefits at the end, I mean, the hugs and the success stories with these kids afterwards, it's incredible. It really is. It's why we do it.
Yeah, and that's a really good point to end on. Is with some of these kids, you work with them the whole year, and you sow seeds that you don't see grow. And to that point, there'll be kids that are challenging to you the whole year, but oftentimes I found that's the first kid to visit you the beginning of next year and say, "Hey, you remember me? How's it going?" Right? And they wanted to check in and say hi because they need that. Kids want that. They want someone that's going to care about them. And they want someone that's going to care about them enough to kind of set some boundaries and push them to being a better person and not just a better student. So absolutely. Eric, thanks for surviving this with me. I got different Zoom clips that I'm going to piece together, and hopefully it's coherent. Your insight has been awesome. I really appreciate it.
And if you guys end up at Kern High, feel free to reach out. We'd love to support and give you help and let you see what it looks like. So don't hesitate to get in touch with us at any time.
Absolutely. Yes. It is not a singular effort. Start day one as being a part of the team, not one person on their own. Yeah. Absolutely. All right. Thanks, Eric. Take care.
Hey, be safe. Stay healthy.
All right. Bye.